It was an abysmal week for the majority of the hobby darling quarterbacks in the NFL. This won't be good for their card prices. I'm overreacting to every game from the opening weekend of football. Let's data dive. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Market Movers video. My name is Tyler Nethercott, better known as Teapot, and this week we are back in the studio for a good old-fashioned data dive video. Why? Because week one of the NFL is more or less in the books. We've got one game left tonight, and the rest of them, well, there's a lot to talk about. I'm gonna go game by game through the box scores, look at maybe fantasy impact, but more importantly, we're gonna talk about cards. And if you remember, I did a video about 4 to 6 weeks ago talking about the NFL, which players I thought might still have some room to go up before the season started, which ones you should have been selling, in my opinion. We kind of prospected on how we thought players were gonna perform this year. And if you remember, more importantly, the main thing, most NFL players' cards do go down in value during the season, especially in the first half of the season. There's a myriad of reasons for it, but it's mostly because of that hype cycle. Everybody just gets real excited for the NFL to start, and then they sell off. They start looking at NBA cards, baseball playoff cards, other sports. And so now is the time to kind of look at this and go, if you're holding these players, maybe you should sell, maybe you should have already sold, but if it's not too late, get out of them. Which ones overperformed? There's a lot to talk about. So if you want to get access to this data yourself, you got to visit marketmoversapp.com. We have 4 million cards now that we are tracking in Market Movers, tons of football cards, plus sales history data for all the marketplaces, all the transactions you need access to comp your own cards, track your collection, and more. Go to marketmoversapp.com and use promo code DIVE, D-I-V-E. You'll get 14 days completely free to try it out and then 20% off for life. So now let's get into it. All right, let's get it started with last week's Thursday night football game, and this was a rematch of the AFC Championship game from last year. We have the Chiefs and the Ravens. The Chiefs won that game last year by 7, and they won this game by 7, and wow, how close. If you saw the finish, literally they say it's a game of inches. Well, Andy Reid said maybe it's a game of less than inches because it was literally Isaiah Likely's toe on the line for the game-tying touchdown. And the Ravens were going to go for 2. They were already saying go for 2, go for 2, go for the win. So that game was not going to overtime. One of them was going home a winner and a loser. They went to the review, as they do on all those final touchdown calls or all-scoring plays. And it was very clear. Some people, Jeff included, were saying he was in. You could see it. His toe was on the line. He was out of bounds. Sorry, Ravens fans. Not really sorry. It was an exciting game, and it was a really good one. And you know what's funny? At this point, Mahomes is the supervillain. Everybody, is like rooting against Mahomes. They don't want the Chiefs to win again. They were the Super Bowl favorites going into this season, again, to three-peat, which is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And everybody's complaining about the refs and saying there's too many penalties like they did last year. But let's scroll down. We're going to look at the box score of all these games because you know what? The box scores, they really don't lie in many ways. Some ways they do, let's be honest. So we got penalties. The Ravens, 7 penalties for 64 yards. The Chiefs, 6 penalties for 45 yards. Now, they kept calling these issues with the Ravens lining up wrong, and then they were showing the game afterward that the Chiefs were lining up the same way and not getting the calls. Obviously, any calls that weren't called on the Chiefs, you could argue, that's not going to show up in the box score. But the bottom line is, I think this is confirmation bias. They're looking at the game, they're rooting against the Chiefs, and when that happens and you're rooting for another team, you're going to see the ones that don't happen and the ones that do happen and complain about that, but you don't see it through the other lens on the other side. What people aren't talking about is that Lamar Jackson literally missed 2 players, including one completely wide open on that final sequence where they could have scored. And then he finally got it to Isaiah Likely, who made an incredible catch and tried to get his toes down and just missed it. So overall, this was a game of obviously, 2 of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I would say quarterbacks number 1 and 3 personally, and we'll talk about who I think is number 2 in a minute. But this game was close. Offensively, Lamar really showed up Mahomes in this game. If we look at the box score, let's jump over. Mahomes, he didn't have a bad game. 20 for 28, 291 yards, a touchdown. He did kind of have a boneheaded interception, in my opinion. Pacheco, he did his usual thing and ran hard, although the Ravens pretty much slowed him down. The X factor in this game was definitely Xavier Worthy, or more precisely, it was speed, because they had Rice on these slant routes, just killing them on slants over the middle, and Mahomes was hitting him with accuracy every time. Worthy had the big play here. He had the rushing touchdown. And Derrick Henry, my guy, well, I mean, decent run average per carry. Lamar was the one getting it done with his feet. They didn't get it to Henry as much as I would have hoped, since I have him on both of my fantasy teams. But Isaiah Likely was perhaps the unlikely hero in this game, and almost the one who would have gotten another touchdown, obviously with a few more receiving yards to add to this. So we could very well see this again as a rematch in the AFC Championship game. I think these are probably the two best teams in the AFC again this year. Really exciting game. Let's jump over and kind of talk through some of their card prices. So what I'm going to do in each of these cases, I'm trying to pull up one card to get sort of some data here from the hobby noteworthy people on all of these teams. So in some cases, you might have a guy who has a fantasy impact, but nobody really cares about their cards. I try to pull in the most important players here. And I'm looking at, in each case, what have these cards done in the last 90 days? So this game was last Thursday, so there's already been a little bit of a reaction window here. And we have Rice. He's up 93% on this card. This is Prism Silver PSA 10. That's up to $81 most recently, a change of $39. Derrick Henry has been seeing some price movement on his cards. I think a lot of people are really excited about him. He got the touchdown early in the game and then just didn't do much the rest of the game. It was kind of like, okay, here we go. We'll see. I expect him to have at least a 12 touchdown season personally. So for his career legacy, that's going to help pad the numbers and his Hall of Fame case. $185 on his Prism Silver PSA 10. That's up 26% in the last 90 days. Mahomes has actually been up. This has been it's really interesting to me. He wins, he gets a Super Bowl, he loses a Super Bowl, he almost makes it to another Super Bowl. He's obviously at this point definitely the best quarterback in the league and one of the best of all time already. And he has been going down in value over the last 2 years. And then all of a sudden, in the last 2 months, everybody's talking about him and buying his cards again. I don't really know what's going on, but apparently people are starting to recognize, okay, this guy actually is in the GOAT conversation already. He's up 25% in the last 90 days on his Optic base card. Then we've got Travis Kelce at $123. That's up a meager 6.5% in the last 90 days. Pacheco up 6.3% and Lamar up 4.8%. But if we look at this, I'm gonna pop this open. Let's look at the last 7 days and price change percentages here. You can see Rice going up, up, up. People apparently not worried about I don't know what could be a potential suspension as the ongoing investigation with his role in the speeding incident earlier this year. So over the last 7 days, his cards, people reacting to those significantly and that performance in that game. So that's kind of interesting. We don't see a lot of that in the season typically with players, like people getting excited. Maybe that's coming back. Maybe the dynamic of 2020, 2021 is coming back in a little bit more of a balanced way. But overall, this was a really good game. Really exciting to watch. I'm very happy with the outcome. The Chiefs get the win, and it's going to be fun to watch some of these players. Some of the bigger names here, obviously, with Lamar and Mahomes, as far as and Kelce, as far as the hobby is concerned. Let's jump over and look at the next game. This was a weird one, right? Timing-wise, Friday night, the NFL decided they're trying to expand their global reach. They're trying to follow the blueprint of the NBA and even Major League Baseball, but especially the NBA, get more of an international scene, get people playing American football in other countries. And they went down to Brazil. And that field was an absolute disaster. I was watching the game saying somebody is going to get hurt. They're slipping all over. They can't get their footing. I think this game would have been even higher scoring if they could have actually kept their footing, because guys were running wide open and then just slipping and falling down and getting tackled. Let's look at the box score here. Eagles came away with the win, and obviously some devastating news for Jordan Love investors and fans of the Packers or people with him on their fantasy team. Yards almost even. 414 to 410, but if we scroll down, the real story was the turnovers, and honestly, this is what kept the game close for the Packers. The Eagles kept turning the ball over and giving the Packers fantastic field position, and then the Eagles also gave up a few really big plays. So let's jump over, let's look at the box score. Now, if you remember, I caught a lot of flack for this. I said that I wasn't convinced yet on Jordan Love. I admitted my bias as a Lions fan, but I also said I just wasn't convinced yet because it was one season last year. And really, it was half of a season. It was a stretch of 8 games where Jordan Love looked really good. He looked fantastic, in fact, but that's not enough of a stretch for me to get really excited and pay the prices that we're seeing in his cards. Well, Jalen Hurts turned the ball over twice. And if you look at Jordan Love's stats, there was one big play, a 70-yard pass to a literally wide open, I'm talking wide open, Jaden Reed. Take that out of his stats. He's 16 for 33 with 190 yards. 1 touchdown and an interception. not exactly lighting the world on fire. Now, on top of it, he's got the MCL sprain, which he suffered right at the end of the game on the second to last play of the game. And he's going to miss, they're saying 3 to 6 weeks. Hopefully, it's not any more serious than that. But in my opinion, this wasn't really that great of a game. I don't think the collective world is going to view it that way. I think they're going to think he had a really good game, and the hobby's still going to be all crazy about him even after this injury. But I do expect to see a dip in his card prices because of this injury. And people are going to move on quickly and start looking at other players' cards or other sports. Saquon Barkley stole the show in this game. 3 touchdowns, 109 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and then he had the 23 receiving yards with the nice touchdown and a really nice touch on that pass by Jalen Hurts. But Hurts, he had a couple boneheaded plays, turning the ball over. Didn't look good in that regard. We'll see what happens ultimately, but that field was a problem. This was another really fun game to watch. I watched this one. Josh Jacobs, solid overall, 16 carries, 84 yards, no scoring, but I do expect him in that Packers offense to have a nice comeback season this year. Let's jump back and look at their cards now. Jaden Reed, no surprise, literally since last week has spiked up significantly. His PSA 10 Prism Silver up to $80. That's a 74% increase. And Saquon Barkley up 69%. Jacobs flat on this card. A.J. Brown down 7%. He had a nice game. Jordan Love already dipping. This is the last 90 days, by the way, though, not the last 7 or 14. So if we close this, oh, that was actually the last 30 days. Sorry, I had my filter set wrong. So a little bit more, timely on that. If we look at the last 7 days, not a lot of movement on these cards. Last 14 days, we're gonna have to wait. Some of these are hard to track. They're a little more rare, but overall, I would say, like I said, Jordan Love, I think his cards are gonna, show some pain over the next few weeks until he comes back, and then he's gonna need to come back and play really well for people who are buying and flipping his cards to put a little bit more confidence into those. All right, Titans, Bears. This is one with some hobby impact because we've got a couple of notable quarterbacks, young quarterbacks obviously here. This game was a complete disaster. This was not a good performance really by anybody, honestly. And if you look at the yardage, 148 yards to 244 yards. I can hear Romeo Crennel, and I'm sure all of you can too. The Bears are who we thought they were. Terrible game. Caleb Williams looked atrocious. And you basically have a blocked kick for a touchdown and an interception return for a touchdown to let the Bears get the win, who, by the way, were losing 17-3 at halftime. There were a lot of people, not a few people in the comments on the video I did a month ago, saying that I was completely wrong for predicting that the Titans would, be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year, that they thought they were going to win the division. This is Will Levis's year to shine. Stop the Titans hate. Be a believer, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's look at the box score and let the box score do the talking. 19 for 32 with 127 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, some really terrible throws, honestly. And Caleb Williams on the other side, 14 for 29 with 93 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Everybody was hyping Caleb Williams after the one preseason game when he played well and he rolled out and he threw against his body and hit the guy on the dart down the sideline. And they're going, oh, this guy, Mahomes, he's Mahomes. And all the hobby, investors were losing their minds saying, he's Mahomes, go after Caleb Williams cards. Justin Fields did the same thing his rookie season. During the preseason, he had an almost perfect preseason game, if I remember correctly. And afterward, he was like, yeah, the game just came to me really, it was moving slowly for me. I could see everything. We know where that led for the Bears. It's early. We can overreact. This was not the performance that anybody holding Caleb Williams Bowman cards was hoping to see. Not the performance that anybody holding Will Levis rookie cards was hoping to see. And really, there wasn't a lot to spotlight in this game. Like, nobody showed up. Offensively, this was just a disaster. So if we jump over and we look at the cards that might be most impacted, we've got Will Levis, his PSA 10 Prism base card over the last 90 days, up 11%. Caleb Williams up 33% on a couple of his different cards here. Levis down 5% on his Prism Silver. And then I threw a couple of Rome Odunze cards here into this. Now, Keenan Allen apparently did get hurt in this game. I'm not actually sure what the impact of that is or how serious it was, but that could mean more targets for Odunze. But if we look back, let's see how many receiving yards he had. He had 1 catch for 11 yards because Caleb Williams just wasn't really getting the ball to anybody. So overall, I expect all 3 of these players' prices to go down as well as anybody else on either of these teams who people might be speculating on. This was not the start that you wanted, and the Bears are lucky to come away with the win, but not particularly impressive on either front. Let's jump over to the next game, Bills, Cardinals. Now this one had some people sweating, who obviously are maybe Bills fans or anything. I wasn't worried. They were losing early. Some people were celebrating Josh Allen fumbling early in the game, saying, yeah, here we go. It's Josh Allen, time to turn over the ball again. And then, you know what? It was Josh Allen being Josh Allen. 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, willing his team to victory with no notable weapons around him and outscoring Kyler Murray, who, by the way, was like 16 of 19 at the half passing, and then finished like 5 of 12 in the second half with like 40 yards. Not sure what happened there. It looked like it was going to be a really good game on the road for Kyler, and then things just kind of fell apart. 1 turnover to 1 turnover, so I guess that means Kyler Murray is also the worst quarterback in the NFL because he turned the ball over as well. Let's scroll down and look at this. So Josh Allen, 18 for 23, 5 incomplete passes, 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 rushes, 2 touchdowns, 39 yards. James Cook had a nice game with 70 rushing yards, and then spreading the ball out all over the place. Josh Allen is the second best quarterback in the NFL. Nobody's going to convince me otherwise. He's the single reason why the Bills keep winning and making playoff runs and making the playoffs every single season. And eventually he's going to get his Super Bowl championship. The story here, maybe more than anybody else, is Marvin Harrison Jr. with just 1 catch for 4 yards on 3 targets. I didn't see it. I heard Kyler Murray missed him wide open at the end of the game for what may have been a game winner. I'm not sure, but overall, not really a great performance for Kyler. Not a great performance for Marvin Harrison Jr. So let's jump over and look at these cards. We got Josh Allen. Let's actually change the sort here. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s Bowman Chrome Prospect First, PSA 10, up 33% in the last 90 days. Josh Allen's Optic Hollow up 19% in the last 30 days. You got Kyler down 2%. And then on the weird thing here on the Sapphire Bowman Chrome for Marvin Harrison Jr., that's down 19%. That's Pop 164. The regular Chrome based is Pop 625, but the price is identical. So I don't know what's going on there. I know Bowman's kind of a new thing for football as opposed to baseball, but typically you're going to see the baseball have a premium between those 2 cards. Sapphire, a nicer, more premium product. Allen down 26% on his base card. That's down to $221. And Kyler down 33% in the last 90 days. So keep an eye on these card prices. All the people who were hyping up Kyler early in the season, I said that the Cardinals were going to be really bad this year. They're an incredibly tough division, and it's not looking good so far. They could have come away with one. They almost stole one on the road in Buffalo. But even in spite of that, Kyler didn't play particularly well. Let's look at this one. Upset of the week, absolutely upset of the week. People in Survivor Pick'em pools were all picking the Bengals to beat the Patriots. It seems like a no-brainer. I picked Joe Burrow in my weekly DFS as my quarterback that I do with a buddy every year. We kind of just do a one-on-one versus each other. And I picked Burrow. That did not go well. Only 224 yards total of offense. The Patriots with Jacoby Brissett outperformed them at 290 yards. 2 turnovers for the Bengals. Penalties, not a lot of penalties for either team, really. 2 penalties for 10 yards to the Bengals, so kudos to them on their discipline. But they didn't move the ball. Burrow, 21 of 29, decent completion percentage, but only 164 yards. Zach Moss, 9 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. Jamar Chase did get it going a little bit late. He was nowhere to be found early in the game. 6 receptions for 62 yards. And honestly, from a hobby impact perspective, there's not really anybody on the Patriots that anybody cares about. Maybe Ramondre Stevenson, but not really. So let's jump over and look at some cards for these players. We've got Joe Burrow. I'm going to change the time frame here. Actually, Ramondre Stevenson. So this is a dirt cheap card, right? If I pop this open, this is rookie ticket auto. This is raw. Not a lot of graded stuff to look at for him. He actually could have been, or maybe still is, a sneaky hobby play because he's one of these guys that I said like 4 weeks ago, fly under the radar. Nobody's looking at them. Their cards are dirt cheap. The floor on the cards is very high relative to like where they could go because they don't sell for particularly expensive in the first place. So this card has basically doubled. It's doubled in price. You can see it sold for $6.50 on average on the 7th and jumped up to $20 on the 8th. So sometimes it's not going to make you rich, but some of these types of players, if you're holding their cards in a shoebox or something at home, get them on eBay, get them sold. Jamar Chase up 40% on his Prism base card over the last 90 days. Kind of interesting, but not a particularly expensive card. T. Higgins didn't play. He had an injury. Down 7%. Chase down 16% on his Prism Silver. And then Burrow down 17%, down 18% respectively on his Optic Hollow and his Prism base PSA 10s. That showing is not going to help his card prices. I still think Burrow, I think most people agree, is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But like I said, I've had him ranked behind Josh Allen and behind Lamar Jackson. And then you could start talking about, where he fits with the rest of the quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion. Let's jump over Vikings, Giants. Well, the Vikings aren't particularly expected to be good this year, but the Giants are expected to be really bad, and they looked really bad. The Giants gave Daniel Jones all that money a couple of years ago. Then he couldn't play last season. 240 yards of offense to 312. The story here really was Sam Darnold. People are wondering how high they should draft Justin Jefferson in their fantasy leagues because, can Sam Darnold get him the ball? People were thinking before the J.J. McCarthy injury that maybe he would get time to play this season, depending on how things shook out. Well, Darnold looked pretty good. 19 for 24, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He looked really good early in the game, just like Kyler Murray, and then things didn't go as well in the second half. But this was just complete domination. Daniel Jones, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They couldn't get anything going on the run game. Malik Neighbors did have 66 yards. He's obviously the notable rookie. So Justin Jefferson, 4 receptions, 59 yards, and a touchdown. Jordan Addison, I heard, got hurt. Not sure how serious that is. Again, I think it was an ankle injury, which he was already dealing with, sort of a lingering issue in that regard. Let's jump over. Daniel Jones, up 25%. Apparently there was some optimism going into the season, up 25%. Now, granted, that sale was a little over a week ago at the end of the season. I imagine his cards are just going to come crashing down, if I'm being totally honest. This card at $75. Wouldn't be surprised to see it come down to $50. Even if we pop this open and just look at this card as a standalone, we can see that it was coming up. This card back in April sold for $21. Yeah, if you're holding that card, sell it last week. And I wouldn't be holding any Daniel Jones cards. I'm not optimistic about him unless you want to collect them, obviously. Malik Neighbors in his Bowman Chrome Prospect Refractor, he's up 22%. He's definitely a very, very talented receiver. I just don't know how much they can get him the ball. Darnold down 32% and 50% on his Prism Base and Optic Hollow cards. Those will probably see some bounce back after this game, if I had to guess. Maybe not a ton, but some. Down 36%, Daniel Jones on his Prism Silver over the last 90 days. And Justin Jefferson down 58%. I just think people are worried now, and I've talked about wide receivers. I had to pause here very briefly and just say I've talked about wide receivers over time and what it means to look at their cards and their values. And I talked about selling Jefferson's cards last year because they were so much higher than every other wide receiver in the NFL. They were higher than Calvin Johnson's cards. They were higher than Larry Fitzgerald's cards. They were higher than many Randy Moss cards. And I ran a poll asking, do you think Justin Jefferson is going to have a better career than Randy Moss? And 55% of people said yes, which blew my mind. He's very talented. He's incredibly talented, but the hype was way too much there. You got to use that as a red flag and just say, I don't know. Long term, I didn't think it was very reasonable. It's quarterback or bust in the NFL when it comes to cards, and we're starting to see his card prices normalizing, just like we saw with others, DK Metcalf and others over the last few years. Panthers, Saints. Boy, do the Panthers still look really, really, really bad. And the Saints, not exactly expected to be a powerhouse, but 47-10. This was the blowout of the week. 379 yards of offense to 193 yards. 3 turnovers for the Panthers. Bryce Young, people were again optimistic about him coming into the season. Well, 13 for 30 passing, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He did sneak in a rushing touchdown, but overall not very impressive. And Derek Carr at 19 for 23 with 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, nearly perfect in the game. Kamara running well in the game. Jamal Williams getting some touch and a touchdown. For me, the story was Chris Olave. I have him on one of my fantasy teams. I was playing Jeff this week, who, by the way, absolutely annihilated me in our week 1 matchup. That didn't go well. I thought Chris Olave, obviously, it's still early, but to see Derek Carr go for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns and then find out that Olave only had 2 catches for 11 yards, that was a little bit disappointing. So those are some of the guys that we want to look at. Carr up over the last 90 days, 89% on his PSA 10 Topps Chrome Refractor, $49, still a very affordable card with a relatively low pop count. Alvin Kamara at $33 on his Prism Silver PSA 10, that's more or less flat. Olave on his rookie autograph PSA 10, pretty much flat over the last 90 days. Bryce Young down 5% on his Prism Silver and 25% on his Optic Hollow. Sorry, Bryce Young speculators, but I don't think there's much room for optimism. I would be selling his cards right now as fast as I can. Steelers, Falcons, this was a big win for the Steelers, who obviously just have this track record under Mike Tomlin of having winning seasons every single year and of sneaking into the playoffs. They're just a competitive, gritty, well-coached team. The Falcons, easiest schedule in the NFL according to Strength of Schedule report. We talked about this. Everybody was expecting the Falcons to win the game. I don't remember what the spread on this game was, but it didn't look good for the Falcons at all, honestly. Yardage was very similar, but the story, again, as with most teams, turnovers. 3 turnovers, low penalties, 5 for 34, but Kirk Cousins, obviously not a great game with 2 interceptions, 16 for 26, just 155 yards. Bijan Robinson, 68 yards rushing. He was, people were taking him first in certain fantasy drafts or second overall behind Christian McCaffrey. Once again, Drake London missing, more or less missing. Kyle Pitts snuck in there with a touchdown. I have to think this Falcons offense with these weapons is going to get it going at some point. I think Cousins will figure it out. Hopefully he's coming back from that Achilles injury. Justin Fields looked solid, 17 for 23, just 156 yards and no passing touchdowns, but 14 rushes for 57 yards. Najee Harris, 20 carries for 70 yards, not particularly great. George Pickens, I think he's kind of the sneaky player this year. Very, very talented wide receiver. They just got to get the ball down the field to him, and he can go up and get it. And Pickens is up 12.5%. All the rest of these guys down significantly. I do wonder now what the Steelers are going to do with that quarterback situation. Russell Wilson was named the starter, but then missed the game because of injury. Fields played well enough. We'll see what happens in week 2, so we kind of throw their card prices up here, but not a lot of optimism around any of these players in general. And then Bijan down 42%. If I pop this open on his Optic Hollow, he's been dipping recently. This game isn't going to help those prices. I honestly thought he was one of the players during the season that actually might go up. I was expecting, maybe still am, a big season for him. Maybe that's just naive optimism now living here in Atlanta and thinking that their running back could do some special things. Dolphins, Jags, you know that I caught the most flack because I did an entire video talking about how I thought Trevor Lawrence, from a card price perspective, was the next big trap, the next Mac Jones, the next person that people were putting tons of money in that ultimately wouldn't pay off very well. Well, the Dolphins came back. They snuck back and won this game. The story was Tyreek Hill being handcuffed before the game, but then ultimately playing 400 yards to 267. Let's look at the box score on this one because that tells a better story. Trevor Lawrence, this is not a good game. This is not a good game. Everybody's yelling at me saying, this is the year you're going to see T-Law is going to carve him up. 12 for 21, 162 yards and a touchdown. No interceptions, I guess. 12 rushing. No, that's Travis Etienne. I thought that was Trevor Lawrence for a second. Trevor Lawrence, 1 carry for 8 yards. Etienne, Tank Bigsby kind of stealing those carries from Etienne. But really it was Tyreek Hill with the big play, 80-yard touchdown, 7 receptions for 130 yards. Waddle having a nice game. And Tua with 338 yards passing. So let's look at this over the last 90 days. Etienne's up 15%, Tyreek's up 12%, and the rest of these guys all down. Trevor Lawrence trending down big time, down 21% on his PSA 10 Prism base card over the last 90 days. Let's pop that open and see kind of what's going on overall and look at the last 180 days. Yeah, I mean, he's just coming down. He's coming down. He's coming down. It's not a great story for his cards. And like I said, I thought the Jags were going to start out 0-4. And if that happens, it's really not going to be good for their prices. They obviously were competitive in this game. They had a chance to win it, but T-Law just didn't look good. And for that reason, they lost the game. Colts, Texans, this was a really good one. Anthony Richardson did show up and play really well, but the story, 417 yards of offense to 303 yards, and CJ Stroud looked as good as he did last year. 234 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, mixed in with a massive game, 30 carries for 159 yards. I didn't know what to make of him going to this season. He's obviously a little bit older. He's not old, but he's a little bit older than most of these young running backs. Just a huge game. Nico Collins, 6 receptions, 117 yards. Tank Dell, and then Diggs stole the 2 touchdowns on 6 receptions for 33 yards. And if we look at Anthony Richardson, like I said, kind of an interesting game actually, right? Only 9 completions on 19 attempts, so under 50% passing, but some really big plays, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception. This is one where if you see the fantasy points, you go, okay, yeah, I like it. I'm glad I have him as my fantasy quarterback. As a fan of football, or if I were a fan of the Colts, or if I'm really looking at his card prices, I'm not sure this actually has me particularly excited. They obviously lost the game in a close one. So overall, I'm not sure what to make about that Anthony Richardson situation. So we look at their cards. Jonathan Taylor, his up 71%. There's been some optimism. Nico Collins up 36%. Mixon down. Stroud actually down a lot because of that hype, I think. And Stephon Diggs down 48% because people are just not particularly optimistic about him. Commanders, Bucks. The big story in this game is Baker Mayfield. If we look at the box score, he had a massive game, 289 yards, nearly perfect on his passing, 4 touchdowns. He looks really good. It's kind of the resurgence of Baker. Is the hobby going to show favoritism toward his cards now? We'll see. Mike Evans with 2 more touchdowns. Just an incredible career, honestly. And Jaden Daniels, it's an okay game. He rushed a lot. Actually, it was a pretty good game. 16 carries, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's kind of the story for the Commanders who, that was kind of some garbage time scoring, honestly. But let's look at those cards. Rachaad White, the running back, he's up 153% on this low-dollar rookie auto. Not a lot of cards graded for him. Godwin up 59%. Baker, I think his stuff's going to come to life after this week. I don't know how much, but I think it'll come to life. Mike Evans, to me, is for a long-term receiver hold. Actually, one of the better buys, just long-term if you'd like collecting Hall of Famers. And then I threw Brian Robinson on here. We do not have any of Jaden Daniels' cards, sort of unlicensed leaf-type stuff, Sage, tracked in Market Movers. But I'm sure those will be seeing a little bit of life. It'll be exciting to see his cards when they come out. Cowboys, Browns. This Cowboys really dominated this game even more than the box score suggests, 33-17. Deshaun Watson, his cards are cooked. He just does not look good. The Browns once again gave up all this, draft capital and other things to get him, and he just doesn't look like a good quarterback. They should have kept Joe Flacco, honestly. Dak Prescott, not a huge game overall. This was all about the defense for the Cowboys, and so Ezekiel Elliott, his cards have doubled, up 108% in the last 90 days since he came and got signed back by the Cowboys. Cooper flat, Dak down a little bit, basically flat, CeeDee down, Lamb down, Jerry Jeudy, not a lot of room for optimism with him, and Deshaun Watson down 40% over the last 90 days. Seahawks and the Browns, Bo Nix, obviously a big story here, the rookie quarterback, and Kenneth Walker, maybe the other big one, as well as DK Metcalf. Kenneth Walker did have a big game. He left with an abdominal strain, but he said he's okay, so hopefully no major impact there. Bo Nix didn't look great. 138 yards, threw the ball a lot, 42 attempts, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. Did scoot in for a rushing touchdown, but not a great debut for Bo Nix. And if you look, this Bo Nix, Bowman University Inception Prospect Auto PSA 10 is up 250% over the last 90 days. This card in particular has just been going up, up, up. There's actually been a lot of optimism around this card recently. I think some people got excited by some of his preseason performances. DK up 9% on this card. Geno down significantly, and Kenneth Walker actually down a ton on several of his cards. Maybe that performance will help him bounce back. Couple more games to look at, and then we'll wrap it up. We got the Raiders and the Chargers. Raiders not expected to be particularly good this year. Gardner Minshew got the start, 257 yards with a touchdown. We got Justin Herbert with 144 yards. The weapons is going to be the issue. We talked about it. I did say I think Justin Herbert long-term, if he starts dipping significantly this season, I'm going to be looking to buy his cards because I believe in him long-term. J.K. Dobbins, 10 carries, 135 yards. And fantasy darling Ladd McConkey here from Georgia, 5 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. Zamir White, kind of disappointing, honestly, for people who were high on him from a fantasy perspective. Devontae Adams cards up 17% in the last 90 days. Herbert down a little bit. Dobbins down massively. He could have been a sneaky buy. That's a low floor at $10 on a PSA 10 Prism base card. I think that card's going to bounce back up. And Aiden O'Connell, who we thought maybe would start down 47%, so get rid of those cards if you're holding them. This one was a nail biter. I was nervous. Lions, Rams. I knew this was going to be a fantastic game. A rematch of last year's NFC Championship game. NFC semifinal game. The Lions lost in the NFC Championship. Stafford, he looked gritty. They had some big injuries. Puka Nacua went down during the game. He lost his left tackle. He lost another offensive lineman, a guard. Stafford definitely outplayed Goff in this game. David Montgomery, it was really the offensive line for the Lions that got the job done, and Jameson Williams showing up in a big-time way with his speed. So really happy with the outcome in that game. Jared Goff's up 15% in the last 90 days. St. Brown flat. Stafford down a little bit. David Montgomery down 11%. I don't expect a lot of buzz around Stafford or Montgomery or even necessarily Nacua this season. Cooper Kupp obviously had a nice game when Nacua went down. Jahmyr Gibbs, he looked good, but that performance isn't going to add any life to his card prices. And then that leaves us with one game left tonight. Hasn't been played yet as of recording this video, and that is obviously the 49ers and the Jets. We saw what happened last year. Aaron Rodgers running out on the field with a flag and then goes down immediately with the Achilles injury. How is he going to play? How is an older Aaron Rodgers going to play? He's got weapons. He's got Breece Hall. He's got Garrett Wilson. But the Niners, I think they're still going to be really good. I think Brock Purdy is very good in spite of what some people say, and we'll see how that pans out tonight. CMC with a questionable with an injury, so hopefully that's not a major issue. He's up 17% in the last 90 days. Breece Hall up 13% on his XRC, and then the rest of these guys all down. Debo down big time, 46% over the last 90 days. So that pretty much does it for this week. That's the rundown. There's a lot. There's obviously a lot of games that happen every week, and we look at these card prices, like I said, when it comes to football cards during the season, most of them start to go down, and some of them go down big time fast. When these players don't come out well, and if their teams lose and they don't play well, the hobby overreacts and these big sell-offs happen. So if you're holding those cards, honestly, unless you want them for the long term, I would be looking to offload those pretty quickly here if you haven't already. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Are you excited about any of these performances? Are you buying any of these players right now in particular and bullish about their performance this season? Let me know. As always, make sure to like this video and subscribe. That always helps us out a lot. And until next time, happy investing, keep on collecting, and make sure to have fun.